Welcome to the Broken System Podcast. I'm your host, Robert, and joining me is my insightful co-host, Lexi. Together, we're here to uncover the flaws and challenges within our justice system, where fairness and equality often fall short.
In this podcast, we aim to delve into the complexities of our justice system and explore the experiences and perspectives of those who have been affected by its shortcomings. We'll dive deep into the stories of individuals who have faced injustice and examine the systematic issues that perpetuate the broken system.
Our goal is to bring awareness to the disparities and biases that exist within our justice system, and to inspire our listeners to take action. Through thought-provoking discussions, interviews, and analysis, we'll explore the various aspects of the broken system and seek to understand how it can be reformed.
We believe that by shining a light on these issues, we can empower our listeners to become advocates for change. We'll discuss potential solutions, highlight success stories, and provide resources for those who want to make a difference.
So whether you're a concerned citizen, a legal professional, or simply someone who wants to learn more about the flaws in our justice system, we invite you to join us on this journey. Together, let's challenge the broken system, amplify unheard voices, and work towards a more just and equitable future.
Get ready to explore the depths of our justice system like never before. This is the Broken System Podcast.
This content is not suitable for children, as it may contain material or themes that are intended for a mature audience. Additionally, it is important to emphasize that individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, and judgments should be reserved until a fair and impartial legal process has taken place.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on the Broken System Podcast are entirely their own and do not necessarily represent the perspectives, opinions, or positions of the hosts or contributors.
Welcome, everyone, to the Broken System Podcast. I'm Robert, and alongside me is Lexi. Join us as we dive into the depths of a mysterious disappearance that has haunted a small town of Gothenburg, Nebraska, dating back to December 10th, 1987.
Christi Nichols was a 22-year-old, quiet and dedicated mother of two whose life took a dark turn one fateful night. As we unravel the enigma surrounding her disappearance, prepare for a story marked by deception, domestic turmoil, and a cloud of suspicion that lingers to this day.
As we journey through these twists and turns of this chilling tale, the spotlight intensifies on Mark Nichols. Allegations of physical abuse, domineering behavior, and a failed polygraph test make him the prime suspect. But the question remains, what happened to Christi Nichols?
Join us as we peel back the layers of this unsolved mystery, exploring the shadows that conceal the truth and the haunting legacy Christi left behind. The Broken System Podcast starts now.
Christi Jo Nichols was born September 6, 1965 in Overton, Nebraska. Her life seemed like a typical small-town story. She was known to be a very smart, quiet, and timid woman who was painfully shy around strangers.
Christi's life took a turn when she met Mark Nichols in 1984. They quickly married and settled in Gothenburg, Nebraska, a small farming town. It was Mark's second marriage, and the couple went on to have two children together, who became Christi's focus and pride.
But behind this seemingly ordinary life was a much darker reality. Christi's family and close friends began to realize the extent of the abuse that she was enduring during her marriage to Mark. Her cousin recalls Christi showing her bruises and saying it was something that happened often, but she really downplayed them.
Now, according to the Charlie Project, in November 1987, Mark and Christi were having marital problems, and Mark was allegedly physically abusing her and monitoring her phone calls. Christi once had to go to the emergency room for injuries allegedly caused by Mark. She went to see an abuse counselor, and Mark was angry when he found out about this and made her promise not to go again. But she went anyway.
On December 8, 1987, 2 days before she disappeared, Christi met with a divorce attorney. The attorney stated Christi seemed extremely stressed and appeared to have been beaten. She told him she wanted a divorce and custody of her children. The attorney advised her to not return to the home she shared with Mark, but she refused. She made another appointment to see him, but she disappeared before that next appointment.
On December 10th, 1987, Christi had an appointment with an abuse counselor and the chief of police. During this meeting, Christi had informed the chief about how she had injured her thumb during a fight with Mark. And according to the Lincoln Journal-Star, the chief said that Christi had two young kids with her during this appointment. They were tearing into everything in the office, which was causing Christi to be more stressed. The chief said, "I swear to God, she could have walked out there and left the whole kit and caboodle behind." These kids had her beside herself. They had my office half torn up. They were into everything, and she was to the point where if she hadn't been standing there, she would have slugged him. The abuse counselor did not agree with what the chief had said about Christie's behavior during this meeting, and before leaving, Christie made another appointment to meet with the counselor again the following day.
That evening, Christy, Mark, and the kids ate dinner at a Pizza Hut and got their pictures taken with Santa. Mark later told Unsolved Mysteries that he felt real uncomfortable with Christy on this day because he felt a lot of anger coming from her. Despite this, they hired their babysitter for the night, who had been babysitting for the family for a year, and went out to play pool at a bar where Christy worked. The babysitter told Unsolved Mysteries that she was surprised they were going out together because she knew they weren't getting along.
Mark later told Unsolved Mysteries while they were at the bar, quote, things seemed to be going real well. He felt that there was a good attitude and having a lot of laughing and carrying on. The owner of the bar, who happened to be Christie's uncle, painted an entirely different story. He said that the tension between the couple was apparent, and Christie told her uncle that she and Mark were having marriage problems. The uncle said, it surprised me that they were in there that night.
The night took a sinister turn when Mark and Christy left the bar around midnight. They stopped at a late night convenience store and then returned home. The store clerk later told police that Christy was chatting with the clerk while Mark shopped for milk and some other breakfast items. The clerk recalled that Christy seemed really anxious and edgy, and it seemed like she was in a hurry to get somewhere.
According to Mark, he and Christy went home after shopping. Once they got inside, Christy walked by the living room where the babysitter was and went into the main bathroom for the next 15 minutes. Mark said he paid the babysitter in cash, and around 5 or 10 minutes later, the sitter left. However, the babysitter told Unsolved Mysteries and other media outlets that she never saw Christy after she and Mark went to the bar. She had only saw Mark when he came home at around 12:30 or 1 a.m. She said that she only heard one car door slam and she did not hear any footsteps from Christy, nor did she hear her in the bathroom.
The babysitter further said it was strange that Mark paid her in cash because in the past, Christy was the one that always paid, and she always paid by check. Mark claimed that Christy went to bed, but when he woke up the next morning, she was gone. Mark reported Christy missing, telling the police that she had left on her own. He provided a detailed list of items she had taken, including clothing and toiletries, which raised suspicions.
Despite the red flags and Christie's history of abuse, the police believed that she had abandoned her family. No investigation was launched, and Christie's mother, Connie, was left to worry on her own.
Connie refused to accept that her daughter had abandoned her children and disappear. She knew Christy as a loving mother who was in constant contact with someone. After learning that Mark told her grandmother that Christy had left, Connie took matters into her own hands and sought help from the police. A grave injustice was done when the police initially refused to investigate Christie's disappearance. Consequently, there was very little media reporting about her case until February 1988, more than 2 months after she had vanished.
The lack of attention on Christie's disappearance was striking. The first mention in the media was a small blurb on page 2 of a local newspaper asking the public to keep an eye out for her. And it wasn't until January 6th of 1988 that another article emerged revealing the discovery of a handwritten note in Christie's car addressed to the man that she was allegedly having an affair with.
The note mentioned her contemplating leaving her husband and children. Despite this revelation, the police did not take the matter seriously. They claimed that 3 people had seen Christie after her disappearance, and there was nothing to suggest foul play.
This led to the painful realization that Christie's family would have to take matters into their own hands. Her family organized poster distribution and conducted extensive ground searches, all in a desperate bid to find her. They even hired a private investigator.
Christie's family commitment to finding her was unwavering. Her Aunt Joanne moved to Omaha to work for the private investigator, eventually becoming a licensed PI herself. Together, they began to uncover disturbing details about the days following Christie's disappearance.
Shockingly, the day after Christie was reported missing, Mark moved out of their family home, and within a few weeks he had sold both of their cars, raising further suspicion about his involvement in her disappearance.
About 6 weeks after Christie disappeared, the private investigator was granted access to the home where Christie and Mark had lived at the time of their disappearance. It was there that they made a horrific discovery: blood on the carpet in the bedroom.
The blood was not just on the carpet, it had soaked all the way through to the pad underneath. When it was tested, it was confirmed to be Christie's blood, and it was a stunning revelation that raised serious questions about what had actually happened to her.
Mark claimed that the blood was menstrual and had seen Christie standing over it in the middle of the night. However, a lab later determined that it was not menstrual blood.
Another shocking twist, investigators also found Christie's blood in Mark's trunk. All of these discoveries paint a disturbing picture of foul play. But despite the mounting evidence, Mark continued to insist that Christie had left on her own.
Finding all that blood changed everything. Connie, Christie's mother, was forced to grapple with a horrifying realization that her daughter may not have just ran away like Mark had claimed.
A year after Christie's disappearance, her daughter, who was only 3 when her mother had vanished, told Connie that, quote, Daddy put mommy in a bucket and placed her in green water. This revelation added to the growing fears that Christie had met a gruesome fate.
Following these revelations, a judge made the decision to remove the children from Mark's custody and place them with Christie's mother, Connie. Connie took care of them for about a year before a new judge placed them in a foster care to provide them more of a neutral environment.
But it didn't end there. The children were eventually sent to live with Mark's parents, where Mark also resided. Connie had visitation rights every other weekend, but she had to worry about her grandkids in addition to her missing daughter. Later, Mark gained full custody of the children, and Connie no longer saw them.
After the Nebraska State Patrol took a case from the local police, media attention began to increase. It was announced that the additional State Patrol investigators would be assigned to investigate Christie's disappearance.
Christie's family and their private investigator continued to push for a thorough investigation, believing that Christie had met with foul play. Their persistence and determination led to the reopening of the case.
The State Patrol took over the case, determined to uncover the truth. They started by examining Mark's account of driving around searching for Christie after dropping the children off with their grandmother. However, detectives couldn't find a single person in the small town of Gothenburg who had seen him that night.
The investigation also delved into Christie's claims of abuse. It was discovered that just weeks before her disappearance, she had been treated at the hospital for injuries sustained during a fight with Mark. She also consulted a divorce attorney and an abuse counselor in the days leading up to her disappearance.
Christie's family, her mother Connie, and their private investigator continued to be relentless in their quest for answers. They organized ground searches, called detectives daily, and met with them weekly, but still there was no sign of Christie.
However, in March of 1988, 3 months after Christie had vanished, a breakthrough came. The snow began to melt, and a trucker discovered her suitcase at an interstate rest area just 30 miles west of Gothenburg.
The contents of the suitcase were chilling: two pairs of Christie's jeans, a sweatshirt, a bra, a jacket, and her purse. The list of items were similar to the items that Mark had given to the police when Christie first disappeared.
Detectives were surprised by the precise match between the suitcase contents and Mark's list. It seemed as though someone had deliberately placed these items to be found. Yet Mark frantically denied that he had described the suitcase contents to the police.
Despite this disturbing discovery, investigators were unable to find other evidence connected to Christie's case in the surrounding area. Nevertheless, the suitcase confirmed their suspicions that foul play was involved.
In June 1988, Connie wrote a heartfelt letter to a local newspaper expressing her belief that Christie was murdered and likely buried in the Dawson County area. The letter talked about Christie's life and all the pain her loved ones were feeling. The police classified Christie's case as a missing person with foul play, as nothing had surfaced in the investigation to indicate that she was still alive.
Mark, on the other hand, maintained that he believed Christie was still alive and simply she just didn't want to come home for some unknown reason. Mark was asked about the suitcase. He said he was not real sure about it. It was hard to figure out about that. Hey, he further said that the last clue he had came in a month prior. A doctor in Denver called asking about some medical records for Christie. Mark said, "It's a little bit of a long story. I really don't want to get back into it." Police were asked if they knew about this call, and they said they had heard about it, but they were never told what the doctor's name was, and they weren't able to really prove the call actually happened. Mark also said he was unaware police found blood in the home he and Christie shared. He had moved out because the rent was too high.
In the summer of 1988, Unsolved Mysteries filled an episode on Christie's disappearance. Mark denied any involvement, and he had told Unsolved Mysteries that people in small towns, they talk a lot, and a lot of these rumors tend to get pretty vicious. There's been a couple rumors that I chopped her up and put her in garbage bags and buried her at the dump. That's one of the first ones I heard, and that one really got to me because I guess they were actually up there digging around.
Mark also said there seemed to be a lot of rumors going around that I was always beating up on her. That's just totally wrong. Mark told Unsolved Mysteries, "I had never done anything to hurt my wife. That's just the person I am. A lot of people think I'm a violent person. I'm not a violent person. I want very much for Christy to come home. But if for some reason she doesn't want to come home, Christy, at least call somebody, let us know where you are, whether you're all right.
Around the same time Unsolved Mysteries came to film their segment on Christie, her family asked for around 500 volunteers to help them search for Christie's body. They wanted to search throughout a 15-mile radius around Gothenburg, Nebraska in early October. They were hopeful that people who were familiar with the outdoors could search as team leaders. They were also hopeful that people with four-wheel drive vehicles, dirt bikes, boats, horses, helicopters, and airplanes could help them out.
The family's PI was going to lead the search while the Nebraska State Patrol could be there to help. The PI said that they needed to conduct a proper search with as much manpower as possible. If they had other alternatives, they would take them, but they didn't.
Christie's uncle said, "There is nothing worse for a family than to not know whether a loved one is alive or dead." Connie added, "The only way we can cover this large area is to get help of people and equipment." A fund to aid the search was established.
In the end, around 300 people helped search for Christie. There were 12 ground teams, 7 all terrain vehicles, 5 horse teams, 2 boat teams, and 2 scuba teams. At times throughout the search, volunteers thought they found evidence, but it always turned out to be unrelated.
In mid November, Christie's segment on Unsolved Mysteries aired, and around 165 calls came in. Some of these calls led to further searches, but Christie was not found. On December 11th, multiple articles were written for the 1 year anniversary of Christie's disappearance. Connie told the Associated Press, "I honestly feel that she's not alive. I just don't think there's any possibility that she's out there."
Mark said he thought Christie was alive, probably living out west somewhere. He said he and Christie were having marital problems when she disappeared. However, they were minor.
Mark said the State Patrol told Christie was having an affair when she disappeared. He said he didn't know that at the time, although he had his suspicions. The State Patrol detective leading the investigation said, "I'm to the point now where I don't think she's coming back, and I'll be shocked if she turns up alive." The State Patrol said that the FBI had joined the investigation at their request.
In April of 1989, Mark filed for divorce from Christie, claiming she abandoned him and the children. He then remarried and moved to a different city.
The family continued to fight for answers. In May of 1989, another extensive volunteer search was conducted using ground and horse teams. Around 100 volunteers searched 200 square miles for clues, and according to authorities, they found some, quote, undisclosed evidence. The evidence was sent off to the lab for testing, and police have never said what this evidence was. However, the family's determination never wavered. They pushed for the case to be presented to a grand jury, but ultimately their requests were denied due to insufficient evidence.
In July 1989, Mark told media that Christie threatened him with divorce multiple times. He said, "I had suspicions that she may be seeing someone on the side. I had talked to her about it several times and she said there's nobody." Mark further said he went through 6 lie detector tests in one day and passed them all.
In December of 1989, for the 2 year anniversary, Christie's mom and grandmother begged people to come forward with information. The State Patrol said they believe Christie is dead, however, they have not found her body. They said that the investigation was ongoing and they were still chasing leads.
In May 1990, it was reported that Mark had sued Connie for recording some of his calls to her home. Connie admitted to recording parts of the conversations with his children. A judge dismissed the lawsuit. In December 1990, for the 3rd-year anniversary, the State Patrol had a new lead detective that was on the case. He told the media they were definitely going to solve Christie's disappearance. It may just take some time. He said they were working on theories that could lead to proof that a certain individual was responsible.
In 2003, the Nebraska State Patrol's Cold Case Division took on Christie's case as a homicide. They identified Mark as the prime suspect, especially after it was revealed that his story didn't align with the evidence. Throughout the years, the family held on to hope of uncovering the truth. They refused to give up on their quest for justice, but as time passed, leads grew cold and reporting on Christie's case was few and far between.
In 2007, for the 20th anniversary, Christie's family once again sought answers. They believed she was likely dead and had been buried somewhere. In an attempt to gather tips, law enforcement included Christie's case information in a deck of playing cards distributed to prisons and jails throughout the state.
In 2012, for the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, Christie's Aunt Joanne had expressed that the family's continued hope that they would find out what happened to Christie. She also revealed that there were rumors circulating in town regarding the possible locations of Christie's body. Despite the passage of time, the painful lack of closure, and the ongoing search for answers, the case of Christy Jo Nichols remains unsolved.
Now, more than 3 decades have passed. The case of Christy Jo Nichols remains open and unresolved. Authorities have not given up on their pursuit of justice. They continue to investigate the case, working collaboratively with the Nebraska State Patrol, Dawson County Sheriff's Office, and the Gothenburg Police Department.
Sergeant Clint Elwood, an investigator with the Nebraska State Patrol, emphasized that just because the case is considered cold, it doesn't mean they've stopped working on it. He expressed the commitment of law enforcement agencies involved to find a resolution for the family and the community. Any information that comes forward is followed up, and the authorities are dedicated to keeping the story in front of the public in the hope of generating new leads.
As technology advances, new investigative tools become available, giving new hope to the authorities that this case may one day be solved. Sergeant Elwood stressed the importance of bringing closure to the family and the determination to resolve this long standing mystery.
The need for answers and closures is also palpable in the posts made by members of Christie's family on social media. Christie's daughter, Lindsay, expressed her longing to know what happened to her mother and to find her. She shared the family's deep need for closure, and Christie's sister, Cindy, also called on the community to remember her and to share her story.
According to the Gothenburg Leader, a recent article published on December 14th, 2023, after 36 years, Chief Olson said there are many people still intrigued with the case and determined to one day solve it. Occasionally, tips will come in, though after this much time, they are fewer and far between. When reruns air of unsolved mysteries, they'll get some anonymous letters sometimes, and they'll get some phone calls and tips from several states. Not always are they able to follow up on all of them, but they certainly pass them along to the State Patrol, Chief Olson said. As law enforcement officers and investigators, we know somebody out there has some information. Not necessarily they are keeping it from us, but maybe they just don't realize it could help. Sometimes it's just those little things that lead to a direction that we can take a closer look at.
The article goes on to say it's still tough for the family. Both her mother and father are still living, and it's tough on them. Olson continued, I think it will be solved with technology and DNA advances. And I think it comes back to people's memories. Maybe they think I should really say something. I haven't wanted to say anything for all these years because I didn't want to look like a fool. We don't care about any of that. We just want the information. We would rather have it and find out there's nothing to it, but maybe it would pan out and be just what we're looking for. He also stated, not by any means is this investigation over. It is always open and always will be until we can figure it out.
If you have any information, even something you may think is a trivial detail that really may not be anything, please do not hesitate to call Chief Randy Olson at the Gothenburg Police Department at 308 537 3608. So, Lexi, what's your thoughts on this case as we look into it and as we've researched through it?
I think it's really evident that it's mm, domestic violence that is just not being listened to, which is really sad, but often a very common theme in missing person cases, especially when there's a lot of clues kind of leading up to it, knowing that, you know, family had seen her with bruises and such, and even there's hospital reports to kind of align with that, and yet somehow it's still she abandoned her family. I don't think that's really what happened here.
Me either. And I think that when Mark was the one that set the narrative, he was the one that kind of said that she had left on her own. He's the one that reported her missing and set the tone of what was going to happen and how it was looked at. I think the police didn't really go further into it. And as they did, I think they found some information, and it feels like they just didn't follow up with it with the information from the babysitter, the blood in the house, the blood in the carpet, him leaving, selling both cars. It was just really weird timing for all of that. And I think they dropped the ball. And because they did, they lost some valuable time.
Yeah, and I also think too, when the unsolved mysteries bit had occurred, I think like the quotes that he was giving them was really interesting because it wasn't saying that he didn't do it. He was just being really crafty in how he was kind of saying, I don't know what happened to her, but it seems pretty. And I do think it is always a strange move to suddenly sell your vehicles and sell your home or whatever it is when your loved one goes missing like that, especially because he still had to take care of his two young children and all of that. So I think it was definitely odd.
Yeah, I think when you add in that the kids were so young, And I understand maybe he moved. I don't know that he moved home right away. I think he eventually moved in with his mom and dad, but it
Mhm.
sounded like he just wanted to get the heck out of the house so nobody could come by and take a look at it and see any of the issues. And the worst part is the police were in there 6 weeks later and found blood. So imagine what they would have found had they went the day after she was reported missing and went in there.
Yeah, especially too, I think one thing that's really interesting about that is in murder cases, and the crime scene cleanup part of it is often left on the family. It is not there is very rare, or I don't even think this exists at all, where there is like a contact the police will give and say, contact this company, they'll come and clean it up. No, the family has to go and a cleanup company. So even from that, there's no way he obviously did not clean it up appropriately, and maybe some of it there was maybe a level of guilt, so that's why he didn't wanna stay in the house, of just knowing, like, that's where he maybe allegedly killed her or whatever, but I think it's really sad because I think the true victims are her family and, of course, her children who got to grow up without their mother.
Very much. And the disappointing part for me is that prior to her 2 days prior to her going missing, she was with the chief of police and and a counselor about domestic violence. So,
Yeah.
to me, 2 days later or she went missing 2 days later, reported missing 3 days later. At that point in time, why would that chief of police not say, "Hey, this lady was in my office 2 days ago with visible bruises, visible issues," and say, "Okay, we need to look at this a little further than she just ran away."
Yeah, and I also wonder too, it would be really interesting to look back and see how often that police department dealt with missing person cases, because it could have very well easily been a situation of they just were not equipped to handle a case like this. Um, because technically, like when someone goes missing, even in today's standards, if someone does go missing, you report them immediately. There is no waiting period. If you were told there's a waiting period, that is garbage. That is just not true. It's more so that they feel like, oh, free will, they can come back, or oh, free will, they left on their own, which was something they really tried to push as a narrative in this case. Um, but I still find it really hard to believe if she's such a dedicated mother, like it's being presented to us as she is, that she would just up and leave her children, especially because they were so young. They were only 3 and 1. So at a minimum, like they still needed their mother for things. So I think it's just it would be really interesting to see how that police department handled other cases like this, if it was more of just like a issue of the investigation or more so Mark was saying the right things in the right way where it was believable enough. I don't know.
A and I think that's part of it. I think you go back and you look at it's 1989 or 1987 when it happened, when she went missing originally.
Mhm.
Is when she was reported. So you didn't have social media, you didn't have the technology to track credit cards, GPS, cell phone, you didn't have any of that stuff. So in a small town like this, I would imagine she may have been their only missing persons case 1 or 2 years that was actually reported. Other people probably went missing that just left that were never really reported or just assumed that they had left. So when something like this happens, they just assume, oh, she left. She didn't want to be. And then they find out she was seeing someone else on the side. So that adds a little bit of credibility to it. But then that person's still around and there was no ties to that person or anything that could have possibly happened. Sounds to me like Mark, she wanted a divorce. She was seeing somebody else. She wanted a divorce. Mark found out about it, about the divorce portion and the she was seeing somebody else and they had an argument and he ended up killing her. It is a little weird to me that they were at a store prior to going home and she was witness at the store with him and then an hour later he comes home and she's not in the car. The babysitter doesn't see her or hear from her. So that's odd to me as well. That should be a lot of questions of what happened in between the time they left that store and the time they got home.
Yeah, and especially too, I think it would have been really smart for police to go back and talk with that clerk, because at that point in the case, it seems like that person was the last known individual outside of Christie's immediate circle to have seen her or interacted with her. And it did seem like what was shared with the media that Christy did seem a little off and maybe skittish and just like nervous. But I think it's one of those things too where you don't know what you don't know until it's after the fact, because it was also like it's easy to explain away in the sense of it was a late night. They could have been out and about drinking or just doing whatever. For the clerk, they're seeing a very like a snapshot of that person's life, no other context. So I think it's hard too. And I think it's interesting at the end how the police are like, Liter- literally any detail you have about this case, please share it. Because it's a stark difference from what they were saying in the beginning, where they didn't want to really touch it. But now they're like, if you have literally any information, whether you think it might not be legitimate or helpful, like we still want to hear it. So
I find it interesting that the police it really didn't find out any information, that the majority of the information about this case came from a private investigator and her aunt that were researching and trying to figure out what had happened to her. And then when Unsolved Mysteries came in, they got more information from people around town than the police or the private investigator did. It seemed like everybody flocked to the cameras to talk to Unsolved Mysteries because it was the cool thing to do back at the time. It was one of those shows in the 80s that was very popular and everybody wanted to be on it. But all this information came out then and actually reinvigorated the case to where they started doing searches and looking for them.
yeah, and I think it's probably very common, especially in like more recent cases that where families feel like the police are not listening or doing enough, that they will hire private investigators and probably feel that more work is being done on that side than with the police. And it's hard too because with the police, that is not their only case. They're still doing daily and may have other cases and whatever else. It's hard from that perspective, but I think it's really common that families will hire PIs and get more information and help. And I do think that when you get the right media attention on it, it can do a lot. But then too, when you have a small town, it does breed a lot of rumors and speculation. So it's hard. I don't think there's a perfect way to go about it, but I think the family did as best as they were able to under the circumstances, because I do think had it not been for her and just her family in general, I think we wouldn't be hearing nearly as much about this case as we have.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the things is it's hard when you're researching a case like this that goes back that far because there's just not a lot of so easy today to research something and pull it up on the internet and you find videos, you find news articles, you find all kinds of stuff. But when you're researching this and it goes back and you're pulling true newspaper articles that happened during the time, it makes it even harder. And then you
Mhm.
go that nothing happened for 6 or 8 weeks after she went missing because it was assumed she just left. So
Yeah.
6 to 8 weeks later, they find blood in the house that they lived in, blood in the car, which I find interesting that they found blood in the car because he sold both of the cars within a week of her missing. So that goes back to how much blood was actually there. It had to be a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And even going back to the newspapers bit, like at that point, the public, it's like the information that they have is only as accurate as that newspaper clipping, because it doesn't seem like this department is setting up frequent like press conferences or whatever. Like it's the information is pretty scarce until Unsolved Mysteries steps in and gives more of a context to who's who and what was happening in her life and all of that.
I also find some of the things funny that Mark did, the list of items that he gave that she took
Yeah.
with her being the exact items that were found in the suitcase along with her purse and her personal items. I think right there, as soon as they found her purse with her personal items in it, it should have been ruled something happened and a lot more should have been done right then and there. It did help a little because they started realizing there's more of a story here that he's making up than what he's actually telling us.
Yeah, and I think assuming that he's responsible, thank goodness for dumb criminals in that way, because hopefully, and maybe this could happen in present day, but technology is caught up on things enough where testing could be done and put the pieces together.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if they've tried to test anything inside the suitcase whose fingerprints were all things like that, from 36 years ago. It'd probably be
Yeah.
pretty tough if they even kept that stuff because, at the time it wasn't ruled. I think they do still have the carpet. I think they still have that and some of the samples of blood from the trunk, but I don't know that they kept anything outside of that type of stuff.
Yeah, and even the suitcase thing, it's just so strange to me because it's like you're trying to claim that this woman with two small children just up and left her family. Wouldn't she need these clothing items to relocate or go wherever the heck she wants to go now?
Along with
So to
her
be
wallet,
without
along
them,
with her wallet.
yeah, and all these necessary, because it doesn't seem like from what's shared at least, doesn't seem like she had this grand plan in place of where she was going next. If I don't even think the affair thing, I feel like that seems like a stretch, and that's just more of a convenient fact that Mark is telling the police to strengthen his narrative because affairs happen all the time and it doesn't necessarily lead to people going. And I think knowing that he has a history of being a domestic abuser and being violent and all those things, it doesn't bode well for him. But
No,
I would
not
be
at
really
all.
interested to see what the police have compiled and just like interviews and such because I feel like a lot of the time you can learn a lot from those interviews.
And I laughed when it said he said he passed six polygraph tests, but the
That's just
police
not
are saying,
happening.
yeah, and the police said he failed one of them, so that which made him it partly went to making him a prime suspect. So it's odd
Yeah.
that his narrative of everything, even to the point of what he told the police on the first night or the first days of her disappearance, to what he says during his interviews of, "Oh, I didn't give them a list of the stuff that was in the suitcase, but they have an exact list of what he said was in the suitcase."
Yeah.
And then he didn't know about the affair, but he did know about the affair. And then to me, having the divorce portion and moving out of town so soon after she went missing is suspect to me as well.
Yeah. Because it's just like if you are going to allegedly leave your family, why would you leave behind a suitcase to be found? And like when you need these items to reestablish yourself. Because it doesn't seem like I don't think she was a working woman at the time, from what I could tell. It seemed like her main responsibility in the home was to take care of the kids.
Yeah, and
Uh,
she worked at her uncle's bar at night or something like
yeah,
that, and he didn't like that, he wanted her to stay at home all the time, he didn't like her being
yeah.
at the bar.
And even with that, like she would have needed a lot more money probably to be able to start it anew if that's something that she really wanted to do, but I don't think that that's what happened to her. I think it's
Yeah, I
really
mean,
obvious in situations like this, but it's very easy for the husband to often spin the narrative in a convenient way for their own
yeah, but
benefit.
yeah, I think he took control of the narrative from the beginning, saying that she left in the middle of the night, trying to set it up that the babysitter was there and heard her, and just made that narrative that he woke up the next morning and she was gone, which there
Yeah.
was no signs of any of that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it would be interesting if this happened in more present time. I think maybe the way what was investigated would have been different, but just I think it probably would have been easier to get more media attention or local interest in it, and that could have been a big game changer right out the gate. But I hope one day that her family gets answers. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that you're right. If it happened in today's environment, you would have had cell phone data. You would have had a lot more technology with testing the blood and how much blood there was. And I think that just a different type of mentality with the police force. Not saying that they wouldn't have, but just with the way domestic violence is in the forefront now, which is still not in enough of a forefront that it needs to be,
Yeah.
but compared to a totally different world now when it comes to someone reporting domestic violence, especially, you know, she's had 2 visits to the hospital. In today's time, 2 visits to the hospital would have gotten him arrested probably just in those visits alone, and
Yeah.
then going to a counselor, a domestic violence counselor or abuse counselor at the time, and the sheriff, that would have gotten him arrested along with the other visits to the hospital nowadays. but unfortunately that didn't happen. Her parents are 36 years looking for answers. It says a lot to me that her daughters are looking for answers as well. It to me sounds like that maybe they don't believe the narrative that they were told through the years.
Yeah. And also, while it's not for me to speculate, but who knows what they were told? Something on one hand, they are so young. So maybe they want to protect some of that innocence. And then also just, I don't know, I could see that being a really complicated thing for her children.
Oh, for sure. Because you can't, you have to, it's one of those things you believe your parents and that narrative of 15 years or so that their dad put in place of she left you. She didn't want to be with you. And that's just horrible to think about,
Well,
especially
it's that,
if he did do something.
or it's that, or is your father capable of harming your mother? That's not any better. Both options suck. There's like, you don't win in either of those situations.
No, not at all. And I do find it had to be, and I'm not saying that he went out to kill her. I don't think he had it in his mind. I think it was a crime of passion, something that probably happened while they probably got in an argument somewhere. They may have pulled over, got in an argument in a car or whatever after the gas station, and something happened that he killed her. But the fact that he hid it and has changed narratives throughout the years is crazy to me. And I would be interested to see how his next marriage worked, that he got married a year and a half later after she went missing.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point too, like, what happened to his first wife? Is there history of abuse there? All of those things could have been and should have been investigated because it paints a bigger picture of who you're dealing with potentially.
I'm sure that there was probably prior domestic violence with his first wife as well. And Christy was really young. I think she was 22 when they got together. So
Hmm.
that makes a big difference too, that she's going to put up with some stuff that people normally wouldn't. And it seems like she just stayed in the relationship way too long. And it's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
it is.
But thanks everybody for listening. And if you have any information, remember to reach out to Chief Randy Olson at the Gothenburg Police Department at 308-537-3608. And we'll join us next week. And hopefully you guys have a good week and stay safe. Thanks everyone for joining us this week. We appreciate you. And we look forward to talking to you guys next week. We will have a new episode coming at you with me and Lexi. Thank you. Before you go, we want to remind you to stay connected with us. Follow us on all our social media platforms to keep up with the latest updates, behind the scenes content, and more. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at the Broken System Podcast. And if you want to support the show and get access to exclusive content, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page. Your support helps us to keep the podcast going and growing. Visit patreon.com The Broken System Podcast to join our community. Thank you for being a part of the Broken System Podcast family. We'll be back with more exciting episodes in the new year. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep breaking the system.